Hey everyone, Thornton Smash here, and today we're going to talk about a problem that has been really impacting video games for the last 10 or 15 years, where we're getting games that are just filled to the brim with microtransactions. There's bare bone content, and the little content we do have has so many bugs and glitches that developers tell us they will just patch out in future updates, which really only ends up just breaking the game more. And by far the hardest hit genre was first-person shooters. We have seen a steep decline from the golden age of the mid-2000s, where we had games such as Halo 3, Halo 2, and Halo 1. We had the original Call of Duty Modern Warfares and the juggernaut Battlefield, which have all kind of fallen off in a way where we're now getting these games, but they're not complete. They are full of microtransactions, and they aren't what they used to be, just quite frankly. So we're going to discuss what was the rise and fall of the first-person shooter genre, and will it ever be able to go back to where it was? The core component of video games ever since their inception, regardless of the genre they have been, has always been exploring and pushing yourself and the world to its limits, whether that be jumping on mushrooms as Mario, fighting different Pokemon, shooting down an entire armada as a super soldier in the 26th century, or slaying demons on mass scale. The main core component has always been simply doing the impossible, what you cannot do just sitting on your couch or in the real world. And the 80s was a great time for video games. We got those great properties such as Mario. Nintendo was really flourishing. We did have a couple of shooters, but they were usually in the 2D side-scroller variety or from a top-down perspective. But then the 90s came, and that's going to lead us into what genre we're talking about today. Something that absolutely took the world by storm, and at some point would actually create its own esports league. And the main charge was led by ID Software, who would go on to create notable games such as Wolfenstein, Doom, and so many others later on. But what they realized was that instead of just simply watching what was going on in the game, to actually put you in the game as the main character, to see it through their eyes. And it absolutely took the world by storm. It was a fantastic new way for players to enjoy the game. If we go back and look at it, yes, you can obviously see the graphics of Doom are not amazing. The gameplay mechanics of moving left, right, and forward and backward aren't exactly amazing by today's standards. But to be someone who was in the 90s playing something like this, it was absolutely Keanu Reeves' breathtaking status. And at this time, most of these first-person shooters were meant to be played on the PC, but a couple years later, a little company called Rare would work with Nintendo and create a brand new first-person shooter that was modeled for the console generations with the Nintendo 64. And that game was called Goldeneye, and that game also introduced a brand new group of gamers who couldn't afford PCs or didn't have one at home, but their friends had an N64 so they could go over to their house and play on that console and fall in love with what video games were. I was one of those kids. I didn't have a PC or a video game console. I went over to my friends and I played Goldeneye and Star Fox for hours on end. And it's kind of crazy to realize that Goldeneye was probably the precursor that led to us playing with our friends and then calling them names, teabagging them in game, and just yelling profanities in general, and making this one of the most toxic video game genres of all time. And truly the great thing about all these games released in the 90s, and this will be a theme for this video, is that all these games were complete. They came with all the content in it, all the unlockables, all the skins. You could even unlock different cheat codes to manipulate the game in the future. Nothing was paid for after you bought the game. It was all there, ready to go, and it was really fun to play. But of course, you would need to continue the evolution of the first-person shooters, so Rare followed up Goldeneye with the game Perfect Dark, which actually did improve upon the original. The only problem was the Nintendo 64 console simply couldn't handle it. It's always been a thing with Nintendo, incredibly innovative, incredibly fun to play, but their hardware isn't at times capable of keeping up with the scope of their dreams. This, however, would lead us away from the 90s and into the 2000s, and this would be where things go absolutely off the wall, and we see what I like to call the perfect age of video games in the first-person shooter market. Because Microsoft, with their large line of PCs and seeing how popular the first-person shooter market was for them, decided, hey, why don't we get into that console market as well? We can build it with our PC parts and make a really good console here. And they did, and their launch title changed the world of first-person shooters more possibly than any other game, and that was Halo. This is a game that came out over 20 years ago and still holds up incredibly well. The graphics may be a bit dated, but the worlds are absolutely beautiful and huge to look at. The gameplay mechanics of the regenerating shields was genius. The gunplay was amazing. The sounds was amazing. Everything about this showed what a first-person shooter could be on the market and how far we could truly push video gaming into a new generation. It captured that GoldenEye feeling of playing in the same room against your friends in a multiplayer lobby, while also having an amazing campaign. And just a few years later, they would release Halo 2. and the Xbox Live system, which finally had a way to compete with PC online play. And this opened the floodgates. No longer were you limited to just playing against your friends and seeing who was the best out of the 8 of you and who would continually stomp with that pistol. With Halo 2, you could try your skill against everyone, and players rose to the top. And esport leagues started to form around these games, where people wanted to watch in a competitive form who truly was the best video game player out there, who could take down everyone else and stand alone at the top. And once again, we're at this point in the video where I want to remind everyone, these games coming out at this time period, there are no microtransactions. There are no unlockable skins by paying extra money. There isn't anything that will later on get fixed because the game's broken at launch. Everything, once again, worked with these games when they came out. And just a few years later after Halo 2, we would see Halo 3, and this is what I like to call the era of the last full complete package games. These had games such as Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, we had the Battlefield series, obviously Halo 3 like I just mentioned, and a ton of other FPSs that were just really popular and fun to play. And the best thing about them is, once again, no microtransactions, no broken content. Everything about these games were completely done and they were amazing to play. There was no better feeling than coming home from high school or whatever grade you were, hopping on Halo 3, playing the game, and unlocking the Hayabusa armor, which was a special armor gradient that you could find in-game if you completed a series of challenges, and being one of the few that could actually rock it. And the same goes for Call of Duty with weapon attachments and skin colors. You played the game, you achieved certain stats with the weapon, and then you were allowed to wear them. It wasn't a, hey mom, can I borrow your credit card for $10, buy this skin, and then show off to all my friends. When you showed off your cosmetics in these games, it's because you actually earned it. And FPSs would actually be fine for the next couple of years. We wouldn't see any major issues. There weren't huge juggernaut titles like these ones coming out left and right, but the market stayed pretty sustainable and they were good, fun, enjoyable games. And it's kind of weird because what actually caused the issue for a lot of first-person shooters in today's generation actually stems from role-playing games, funny enough. Games like Oblivion, where developers realized that they could add something called DLC, downloadable content. And DLC was actually created with the best intentions, and when it first came out for storyline games, I think it actually worked quite well. It was a way to reward players who loved playing these storyline-driven games while waiting for a sequel to re-enter the world for a couple of dollars and play an additional storyline. But like all good things, corporate greedy people come in and they absolutely ruin what was once the essence of a great mechanic. And we see that with Oblivion, where they for some reason added in horse armor. And here we see the descent into madness, where now skins in the game, instead of earning them by doing in-game challenges, could simply be sold to you, and all they did was change the look of something.
What is that, bro?
DLC got completely warped from being an afterthought that developers added in after the game had launched to being something that was made months in advance before the game ever launched and purposely withheld so that you would then be charged a couple of extra dollars to play this content later on. And at first, the FPS market wasn't really affected by this. But then they were, and it got really bad. In-game cosmetics then became a loophole. We see that in the Halo 5 system, where you had to buy packs to unlock cosmetics. We see it in Call of Duty, where you have to pay money to buy weapon skins. And the worst part about it all is that function that allowed us to play in the early 2000s with friends, the internet with online matchmaking, that was now turned against us because it allowed for publishers to release games that were nowhere near ready to be launched, looking at you, Battlefield 2042, and say, well, we'll put on an online update later on. And video games are a business. At the end of the day, they should always aim to be profitable, but there's a certain thing where gluttony becomes just a little too much. You don't need to eat your cake and then eat everyone else's as well. And then later on down the line came the free-to-play model. And it seems like everything within the video game market comes out with good intentions and starts off that way, and I believe that the free-to-play model is the same, but then once again gets completely manipulated into something else. While the free-to-play model does allow you to try out the game and see if you enjoy it, they also do some pretty shady stuff, like adding in loot boxes that are very addictive to smaller children who don't know better, while continually charging way more money for cosmetics, like $20 per skin, where if you get 3 of these, you've already paid for a full AAA title. I would much rather go back to the early 2000s era of Halo and Call of Duty, where I paid for the full game, got an amazing campaign, and then the skins in the game were free. My game came out mostly polished, and maybe we would see a couple patches down the line, but it wouldn't come out majorly buggy because of deadlines set by major publishers. And the big question on everyone's mind is, will we ever see a return to this format of video games where it comes out polished, ready to play, and we're not charged an arm and a leg for a couple of Barbie skins? Probably not. The closest we've gotten this year was Halo Infinite. Well, While also very polished and fun to play, it was delayed by a year, which I give them kudos for, but filled to the brim with microtransactions. It feels like if you are a first-person shooter coming out today, that you cannot escape at least one of these problems. You are going to have one of the three baked into your game, and it really sucks for the player base. And I truly believe that the first game that comes out into the market in the next couple of years that decides to ditch these models will be the most successful video game, bar none, in the future. Let me know down in the comments below how you feel about FPSs. Are you fine with the way they are? Do you have any experience playing how the older ones were when they were just ready to come, or are you only familiar with how the new ones work? And until next time, everyone, have a great day and stop buying microtransactions.